Hello, and welcome to Cost-Effective Feature Deployment, Balancing Software Delivery and Cloud Costs. Today's webinar is sponsored by Harness and produced by Actual Tech Media. My name is Scott Becker. I'm from Actual Tech, and I'm excited to be your moderator for this timely discussion. Now, before we get to today's great content, we have 4 housekeeping items that will help you get the most out of this session. First off, we want this to be an informative event for you, so we encourage any questions in the questions box in your webinar control panel. Not only will we have team members responding to questions during the live event, but we'll also have a dedicated Q&A session at the end of the presentation where we'll discuss in greater detail some of the top questions that you ask. The Q&A panel is also the place to let us know about any technical issues that you might be experiencing. A browser refresh will fix most audio, video, or slide advancement issues, but if that doesn't work, just let us know in the Q&A and we'll provide further technical assistance. Now, second, in the handout section of your webinar control panel, you'll find that we're offering several resources. I'd especially like to call your attention to a link to get started with Harness and another link for Harness in there. There are also some links labeled ATM, which stands for Actual Tech Media, that you can find in the handout section as well. So I encourage you to access those resources now and share them with your friends and colleagues. Now, third, at the end of this webinar event, we will be awarding a $250 Amazon gift card to one lucky registrant. Of course, you must be in attendance during the live event to qualify for the prize. Official terms and conditions of today's prize drawing can be found in the handout section. Just scroll to the bottom and you'll find the terms and conditions link there. Now, finally, one of the best benefits of this event is the opportunity to ask a question of our expert presenter. So to help encourage your questions, we have a special additional prize for you. That's another Amazon gift card. This one for $50 for the best question. After the event is over, we'll look at all the questions that came in, pick out the very best one, and contact that prize winner. Okay, with all that housekeeping out of the way, let's get to today's important conversation. It's my pleasure to introduce you to our presenter today. We have Matt Schillerstrom, who's in product management at Harness. Matt, welcome.
Yeah, thanks so much. Appreciate the intro and the hospitality you have for this webinar. Love seeing all the people joining and the chat too. So feel free to keep that chat up and we'll engage in that.
All right, well, take it away.
All right. Hey, everybody. So my name is Matt Schillerstrom. As Scott was saying, I'm a product manager at Harness, the modern software delivery solution. Harness, we do CI, CD, continuous integration, continuous delivery, but we also do feature flags, chaos engineering, internal developable platform, and a whole bunch of other things. But today I want to talk to you about, feature deployment and balancing that software delivery and cloud costs. A little bit about me too. I grew up in the Midwest of the United States, so I'm currently in Minnesota. You might see some corn in the background. That's at my father-in-law's farm in that picture of me. So I get to help out with harvesting in the fall, which is kind of fun. But prior to my experience at Harness, I was a product manager at a chaos engineering startup called Gremlin. Before that, I was at Target Corporation out of Minneapolis as a DevOps engineer for about 5 years, building out their chaos engineering program. And then before that, I was at a nuclear power plant for 13 years. So sometimes people ask why my face glows, and it's because of nuclear radiation and everything, in a good way, I guess. But my brain is oriented around reliability. So you'll hear me talk about reliability today a lot with feature deployment. But I'm excited to be here nonetheless. So, today's challenge in DevOps, I look at 3 things. So speed, reliability, and developer efficiency. And all of this is oriented around, costs at the end of the day too, costs of a developer, cost of a business decision, cost of a server. And, part of my hope for this, presentation for you today is, to understand how to make that change. And, most people don't make changes until they're dissatisfied, right? And part of this presentation is I want to make you dissatisfied with your current processes, your current software delivery lifecycle. And then, I give you information to make changes and decisions, and, we can continue the conversation from there. But again, in DevOps today, where I'm seeing developers, site reliability engineers, platform engineers, right? They're moving to cloud native architecture, moving to Kubernetes finally, right? And they need that speed and velocity without sacrificing reliability so they don't impact their customers. But also, as they're adopting all this new technology, and cognitive load of understanding how things work, right? That impacts the developer. And we just need to make sure that, developers have those modern tools so that they can succeed, right? And also just enjoy their day-to-day job, right? All right, great. One of the foundational statements I always kind of talk about in a lot of my presentations is this quote from a podcaster that I always follow. He's a pastor out here in the United States, but he always talks about, like, if you don't know why it's working when it's working, you won't know how to fix it when it breaks. And that applies to my whole software development career. I don't like to just YOLO, you only live once, and put something in production. I like to, understand how it's working so that, at 2:00 in the morning, if it breaks, I can respond confidently, right? Or at least my on-call engineer friend, I can at least help them out, right? So that I don't put them in a pattern of, failure. But that's the thing, as you think about this presentation today, right? All these things that I'm going to talk to you about, like, help you understand your system just so you can be more confident, right? And then competent in how you deliver software. All right. So two of the things as I orient this conversation, I'm going to talk about feature flags and cloud cost management too, right? And feature flags help you decouple deploy from release, as you make changes in production to your customers. And then it also, like, controls risk to your business and customer. And then just around cloud cost too, I'm going to orient it around just, cloud cost governance and optimization. Back in the day when I was deploying software, I never really had to worry about like the cost of the server that was not underneath my desk, but, in the cloud. I just got to deploy software. But nowadays, developers and FinOps folks work collaboratively, right? Just so they can understand that impact to their business. Because at the end of the day, if a developer understands that business impact, they can make better, more informed decisions. So there's a couple points that when you signed up for the webinar that you're going to learn about. So let's talk through all those and, kind of regroup at the end and ask questions if you didn't learn these bullet points. But, how can feature flags optimize, cloud resource utilization today? So let's take a look at just a case study to jump in to kind of set home how things work. And I know there's like a lot of words on this slide, but this is also for you to take home to your coworkers and learn more from. But one of our customers, Zero Flux, they're based out of Queensland, and they provide technology for bookmakers and wagering service providers for, same game betting and everything. So think about, the NFL, whether that's with a football pigskin or a soccer ball, wherever you are in the world. I said both those words wrong probably, but they help, with gambling and all that fun, right? What's interesting here is the case study for them is they coupled, feature flags with their deployment and delivery of software so that they could reduce their cloud spend, right? And as you see in some of the stats on the right, they had a 50 to 60% drop in infrastructure costs because they changed the way they deliver software, and they changed the way they deliver testing for their software processes by using feature flags. And this is an interesting use case because usually when people think about feature flags, they think about just deploying code in a disabled state and then releasing it to their customer, right? Toggling it on or off. But in this case, they're leveraging feature flags to deploy their code to production in an efficient manner so they could reduce their testing that they were doing for their gambling business processes. And then that, as you saw, reduce their infrastructure costs, which is fantastic, right? If you think about ways that impact the bottom line of software delivery, these are definitely ways that do that. So I put a link in there too at the bottom, and we'll get that out more. But this is a case study that you can kind of see how feature flags, and cloud cost management can help with that software delivery, just to kind of get into the case study there. So let's talk through some techniques, for reducing cloud costs through dynamic feature deployment. And what I hope you achieve in these next few slides too is more, again, like the business impact. So you can go back to your, coworkers and friends with, information to help change their mind, right? And make a important decision on how you want to change your software delivery. But I always like to talk about the bottom line here, because at the end of the day, like, if you don't talk to your leaders about the bottom line hard dollar costs, you're not going to get that investment, right? Whether you're investing in, building your new team or a new module or feature. But one thing I always like to think about, like what impacts that bottom line for software companies. And today, everybody's like a software company, but incidents, downtime, speed, to like getting that production rollout, churn between employees, right? Training, ramping that engineer from day 1 to day 90. Like how long does it take them to get to production for their first deployment? Onboarding just in general, getting them, their laptop, or, getting them just trained up on anything in general. Oftentimes what also impacts the bottom line is, being too reliable, right? This gets into the thing of like, if you over provision your server, to make it too reliable, right? If there's no cost involved, obviously I'm going to deploy, a server that's really big with a lot of memory and CPU, right? Because nobody's going to tell me to deploy something cheaper. Also just risk, right? So like what impacts the bottom line? Risk, like how risky is this deployment to production? Can I control this risk by deploying, to lower environments? Can I deploy to, different customers that have less impact, for example? But these are all things that kind of impact the bottom line. And when I think about, like cloud costs, that's definitely impacting the bottom line. And here's some stats, right, that we got from the finops.org. But 30% of cloud spend wasted each year. And that's not moving, right? And as you'll see in a future stat here too, Gen AI is impacting that drastically, not in a good way. 32% of FinOps, DevOps engineers report getting engineering to take action on cloud costs is their biggest pain point. When I get pinged by my finance team for other things, I'm always slow to respond too, because it's work, right? So you can imagine getting a FinOps, person asking a developer, to right size their resources, right? Like it can be a pain, especially if they have to do it manually. And then 50% of engineers spend days tracking down cost anomalies, right? So what changed and caused this cost, right? And that's where I'll talk to you about how feature flags can help with that too. And some other stats too that we see from like Gartner, as well as some other industry expert reporting tools. Cloud infrastructure spending increased by 23% in 2023. At first glance, 23% doesn't seem like a lot, but if I gave you a paycheck raise of 23%, I think you'd be happy. So can you, 23% in cloud cost increase is quite a lot, right? Another interesting aspect too, just with the increasing more from Gen AI services, if you could raise your hand, right? I bet all of you are dabbling in Gen AI, right? Whether you're using ChatGPT or other services, right? Or open source, large language models. But we're, forecasting to grow 20%, right, in 2024, if not more. And that's, again, serious impact. Like if your business, increases by 20% or decreases by 20%, that's significant, right? So these are things that we have to kind of capture, especially as we're allowing our teams to experiment more, right? Like what's that blast radius of that new feature you're building from a cost perspective? So let's talk a little bit more about, the problem with cloud spend being inefficient and wasteful. So, attribution is challenging in today's market. Like lots of folks, they're missing the context of that accurate cost. Like they can't justify the cost between teams or even individuals or GitHub repos to that extent, right? Everything is manual today. If you don't have a tool, right, like you're manually looking at your AWS boards or Google boards, right, to kind of just see like the context of what it's providing for cost, right? And you're usually manually turning things on or off, like a light switch, not a feature flag light switch, but like electricity. Like I'm going to turn this server off at night, right, and then turn it on in the morning when I need to test on it. There's also just a lack of predictability. So there's no accountability ensuring consumption is within budget. You can imagine if I had $20 in my hand right now and I knew the cost of a server, right, and it was $19.50 for 30 days kind of a thing, like I could pay for that. But if I don't know the cost of what I'm deploying, and I don't know what my budget is, then I become blind, as a developer, and then I just start deploying my code. But these all, all these problems relate to increasing inefficiencies, increased risk, and inability to control, right? And now coupling like cloud costs problems with CI/CD, right? Like CI/CD, continuous integration, continuous delivery, ends at deployment, right? And today, teams, bravo if you have CI/CD in place, because that's definitely a hard place to get into. But still, with that, you have risk in large deployments. So most teams, like one bad feature equals a full rollback of your software delivery, right? So most teams, maybe they're bundling 10, 15 features into that deployment to production. And if there's one issue, you're rolling back, 13 of the 15 features that didn't have issues, right? And that's where like CI/CD is great, but it can't control that feature access to your customer, right? So there's no control in production, just around resolving those like minor issues, right? And you can't isolate the changes, right? Which leads to like the diminishing returns of CI/CD. And as an industry, what I end up seeing, right, is so many folks, achieve a certain velocity, but then it kind of stagnates and diminishes, right? So then what that ends up looking like to the business is, right, reduced velocity, increased risk, poor developer experience. And a lot of companies today are seeing this, especially as they're migrating, from monolithic apps and microservices or to the cloud still, right? Because not everybody's always 100% in the cloud. All right. So let's talk a little bit about feature flags and understanding the concept of that. So feature flags are simple. Like you turn a flag on or off to release a change to a certain subset of your audience, right? So at my prior jobs, when I was using feature flags and not like building them as I am today, right? Like I was creating features for my customers, but I was slowly rolling that out, right? So I would, in my agile development practices, I would, talk to a customer, learn what they wanted, put it, create this prototype, put it behind a feature flag, and then turn it on for that customer, get feedback, iterate, and then I would then turn it on to the rest of my customers, right? So I was able to just easily target a customer, an individual, turn that feature on, get that experience tested and validated just to kind of prove the worthwhileness of that feature. In some cases, it was maybe a color change or a button on a different screen, but in all reality, some of these were just brand new features, right? That I didn't want to just work on, deploy to my customer after 3 months of development and then get feedback. I wanted day-to-day feedback, week over week, right? And that's what I was able to do with feature flags, right? And what we see with feature flags coupling with CD is that you're able to deploy constantly and release when you want, right? So now you can control velocity. Like we see stats of features shipping 3 times faster. We see productivity increase, deployment risk going down, and production rollbacks going down. Like production rollbacks are great, and Harness can provide automated rollbacks based upon certain conditions. But I always look at a rollback as an incident because it's a change, right? It's an impact, right? But with feature flags, you can deploy to production in a disabled state, and then you choose to release to your customer, right? So you have that control, right? So our customers and everything are just seeing that like 30% increase in productivity, right? And 40% of their users are seeing like less bugs and errors simply because, when they deploy a change out to production to one customer, that customer is helping us, test and find those bugs. But then when we deploy it out to the rest of the customer base, right, then they're not experiencing those bugs and everything. So let's talk a little bit about like insights and how feature flags influence cloud infrastructure spending. So let's talk about optimize, automatically, right? So in the old days when I was deploying software, right, I would optimize manually. I would look at my cloud infrastructure spending after deployments or after a month or two or never, right? But now with certain tooling, especially around like Harness and cloud cost management, we can incorporate auto stopping, commitment orchestration, asset governance, and recommendations. And all this means is, we provide and surface to you like a library of things that you can do to like harness, that the financial cost of your infrastructure. And what's great about coupling this with feature flags too is you can, deploy a feature in a small, meaningful way and understand the cost of that feature, if you will, right? Like how is this going to change my environment and my infrastructure around, right? So here again, when I think about auto stopping, rather than having to like turn servers off manually, I can programmatically have that in place, to auto stop when they're not in use, right? And I can, as I scale out my new feature too, I can understand like how many, in essence, like how much workload do I need to optimize for, and how often am I going to have to use auto stopping and everything? Because at the end of the day, like when I have a feature, and I'm, deploying that workload, I need to commit to that spend, and that budget. So that's helping me understand that predictability and cost of everything. Another aspect of that is just kind of staying on track too. So FinOps reporting made actionable for developers. So what I love about this is, developers can use these systems to kind of see their clear costs, look for anomalies, and just, work with a budget, right? Again, that business bottom, that hard dollar savings on the bottom line of things. What's great about this with feature flags too is when you deploy your change out on your infrastructure in a small way, right? Initially with a feature, you can understand what those anomalies are. So if there's an anomaly that's going to cause a minor defect or issue, you can kind of predict the scale of that if you were to deploy it out to all of your customers and what that impact would be. So as we go to the next thing too, so this is kind of where like feature flags today can show you like what happens with that change. So in this case, this is a feature flag that, that was turned on. And then during, the initial 24 hours of this flag being turned on, it kind of showed how there was a 20% of anomalous spend against this perspective here, which allows you to go in and see what happened, right? Usually, when you deploy a change in production, your customer tells you if there's something wrong with the feature, right? Or like your manager pings you because like the database costs have increased or whatnot. But here in this case, a developer can deploy a feature and then be confident that, and understand what changed, right? So they, in essence, don't have to go dig or hunt around for what changed. We present them, that model of what changed so they can be more informed and make a decision. So like how can feature flags help you specifically? Like here's some great use cases I always like to talk about. They're pretty common in today. Like most people that have heard of feature flags or use them, maybe they just use like a homegrown solution. Like in their database, they have a config file or an environment variable that changes the certain settings or parameters. But with like a feature flag management system, you can do more of these common use cases like kill switches or safety valves. So if you have, say, a customer that's causing, like production incidents for you, you can actually like use a kill switch to turn that specific like process off for that customer. Not that it would impact them, but maybe if it's impacting something else, you can turn that off and on, right? So you can kind of control how your customer is using that feature. You can also use it for like user targeting and product entitlements. This is interesting because as if you're building a startup and a SaaS solution, sometimes, pricing is always interesting. So you can use feature flags to have the lever with your business to understand like the pricing model for your customer for turning off and on. And this is especially important as you're learning about like how much does it actually cost to run my business on that SaaS. So you can kind of get more predictable with these test cases. Testing in production is another great use case. So again, you can deploy your code in that disabled state so your customers aren't leveraging that new feature, but then you as a developer, or if you're a site reliability engineer, can test that feature in production without impacting the customer, right? Another great use case, fast incident response. So again, when you deploy a new feature, if it does cause an incident with your customer, so say if you deployed 14 new features in that rollout and one was causing issues, you can actually just turn that one feature off to prevent the incident. But then those other, like 13 features are still with the customer, not impacting anything. There's a variety of other use cases here. A couple more I want to talk about too, just around beta testing and customer feedback, which is close to home. Like if I was to redo my whole agile practice that I was building out at Target 10 years ago with a bunch of people, like if I leveraged feature flags to like release software incrementally to get feedback, that would have sped up the time to value for my customer as well as my team. Another great thing you can do is around global governance. So with feature flags, if you want to control like the name of a feature flag or control like approval processes. You can put all these things into your feature flags to have that governance. And what that means is if you have like a change management board, like a cab or something at your company where you have to review changes, you can actually put those processes into the feature flag pipeline of things so you can have it be predictable and automated, right? So rather than sitting on a call every day at like 7:30 in the morning, where you're reviewing changes that are going to go in for the day or incidents that happened the last night, you can actually streamline your processes with feature flags, right? To actually have the change management process built into your system, right? And at Harness, we do that with our feature flag pipelines too, which is great to use. And we got templates out of the box to implement that. One of the things I want to kind of dig into with this use case is cloud and infrastructure migration. Many folks on the phone here might be doing that today, but this use case is great for feature flags and cloud costs. So today, like there's like 3 common approaches to migration cutovers. So when I think about this from my prior experience, whether that was going from an on-premises data center to the cloud or whatnot, or from a different cloud to another cloud because of cloud costs, switching from like GCP to AWS or vice versa. These are common approaches, right? So we have like DNS. Everybody loves DNS, but you can, the pros of cutting over systems, nearly instant, single control plane. The cons with this is that it's DNS, but more specifically, it requires, engaging the whole network team and then troubleshooting the network. It's a bad time, right? So it's either kind of like a go, no go kind of thing, very large blast radius. You can also cut over just with like an application push, right? The pros there, it's your code and you know how to troubleshoot the issues, but generally speaking, the one app team owns that from start to finish. And the cons around that, right? Slow rollback and de-risking this approach requires substantial upfront investment. So what I mean by that is like app teams, they're not sleeping for days as they're like figuring out how they're going to migrate this application pushover, right? And then again, too, like these application pushes when you're doing migrations from like an old monolithic system to like the new microservice base, for example, like in the cloud, it's all or nothing. So this is where teams are doing these big launches, right? This is where you're seeing like maybe on a website for your healthcare provider, like, hey, on February 2nd, we're going to have this cutover where the system is going to be completely out for maintenance, right? So these kind of application pushes are often, like all or nothing again, right? Where it's very impactful for the customer. There's also abstraction layers too, where you have more control and easier to remove, but there's cons with that too, just as far as like the expense and complexity with everything. But for many of you on the phone today, I'm sure you've done migrations to the cloud, since most enterprises are in some sort of cloud today, right? So these probably are pain points for you, or maybe this is normal and you just don't know that there's like a better solution, right? And that's where feature flags comes into play specifically for this migration use case, right? Because with feature flags, changes can be deployed to the application well ahead of the cutover, right? So you can actually deploy, the new change to, Google Cloud or AWS, right? And actually kind of see how your application is behaving in there, testing in production, and then gradually releasing it to a customer, right? Or an individual, right? And in this case too, with a feature flag, it's dynamic changes. So you don't have to like restart the application, right? Or the container to make the user see that new experience. It's that immediate cutover, it's repeatable. And, again, the previews in production are huge because then, before you give that to your customer and hope for the best, right? You can actually kind of see it for yourself, right? And make sure you see that. So there's some memes here that we put in, but, we always say like testing in production isn't possible, and developers get confident with testing locally on their machine. But oftentimes when it works on your local machine for testing, it doesn't work in production. But again, with feature flags, right, you can test in production safely, right? And then another, story here is, like back in the day when I was doing like Saturday deployments and migrations, if I was in bed before 11:30 p.m., that was success. But oftentimes it turned into a pajama party sleepover with, the admin and operations team into Sunday morning kind of a thing. And that was never fun, for sure. All right. So let's talk about a couple other things here too. So like, how do you maintain a balance between rapid software delivery and cloud cost efficiency? So what I would argue and kind of talk through how like any feature management system should have, right? Like, so you should have like stale flag removal. So once you use feature flags, you eventually inherit tech debt because it is a different code path in your code repos, right? So if you don't have a process to remove those stale flags, whether that's, you know, a sprint every quarter or every 6 months, you're going to run into, you know, stale flag issues where maybe that causes an incident in the future or just like tech debt in general. Another thing, if your system isn't capable with like a GitOps or Git experience, this can create issues with version controls, right? Or just like scalability across your whole enterprise team, right? Because not everybody likes to work in a UI, but if you can have like a Git experience, you can have source of truth for your feature flag configuration. I like to say like flags as code, which creates great auditability and access control. What I love about this experience too, if you pair, you know, the Git experience with like infrastructure as code management too, you can actually understand, you know, the infrastructure that you're deploying with your new feature and the cost of that as well, right? So you can kind of right size your infrastructure for the size of the feature, or that's like a small, medium, or large type of, you know, deployment. But you can pair that up with this Git experience as well. Another thing that you need to have too, just around pipelines. And again, like feature flag solutions that are homegrown, again, are usually just like on off switches, the features on or off. But then there's all that administration cost up front to using that feature flag. And with pipelines today, you can put in that release tracking, whether that's like a Jira ticket, right? Or ServiceNow ticket for approvals. And then you can have that progressive delivery in place for rolling out that feature. So you can, you know, roll that out to 10% of your audience and then 50%. You can pause for like a beta release for a few days and kind of let this feature soak in, which helps understand like the cloud costs of your infrastructure as well. And then you can continue to roll that out, right? And this can all be automated. It doesn't have to be a human pressing buttons at 10 o'clock at night or 2 o'clock in the morning. This can all be automated so that you can sleep and experience life, you know, and have fun with software delivery. And this is where you can programmatically put in gates too, just for safety, right? And then another thing too, around 24/7 monitoring. So like with Harness feature flags too, we can pair up with a lot of your metrics just as you deliver software, right? You understand if it's going to impact like service level objectives, if you're doing that, or just any other health metrics. And then you can also pair this up with like running chaos engineering experiments too. So as I like to say, like kind of like the perfect feature to delivery, right, is deploying a feature, running some tests on it, you know, seeing if it impacts the metrics to the customer, and then looking at like the overall cost of that feature just to kind of see how it works out. And not to scare you, but you know, if you're using Kubernetes, these are common failure modes that exist. Kubernetes isn't self-healing all the time, right? So all these faults that exist in the environment are things that you need to prepare your application for. And that's where feature flags helps, right? Because then you can deliver your feature into production, test for these like reliability vulnerabilities, and then kind of understand. And I'll show a few more screens. But if you're using any of these like resiliency patterns in your code or, you know, infrastructure at the end of the day, all of these cost money, right? All of these cost some sort of like server capability and capacity. But if you can use feature flags to deploy and test these mechanisms in a small scale, you can actually understand like if they work and like the cost of using these in your code, right? You don't have to just use these blindly and then hope for the best or wait for that incident to reveal that these resiliency patterns didn't work and everything. All right. And then I'll end on this slide before I go to demos, but overall what I kind of like to say with, you know, cloud costs and feature flags and all that kind of stuff is failure happens, right? Like things break and systems degrade and fail. But with all this new technology we're releasing, and the unknowns and the cognitive load that you have to understand how things work. There's solutions and tools in place that can help navigate this for you, right? So that you have a great developer experience as well as a customer experience. And specifically with like harness feature flags and our like integrations with continuous delivery, cloud cost management, and chaos engineering, you can like look at this chart and then not have any concerns about these questions, because like that solution that we provide can answer all these for you. So I'm going to click into a demo real quick, and then also, we'll start navigating through some questions here. I'm going to share my screen with the window. All right.
It's coming up, Matt.
Awesome. Love technology.
We see it now. Yep.
Cool. So that, this is the harness platform, specifically the feature flag module. And here I just have a bunch of features. In essence, these are just toggles and whatnot. But if I if I click into one of the features, for example, this is where I can kind of see cloud cost monitoring in place. So we have a native integration for. So when you turn on a feature, we actually monitor for a period of time to see if it caused an anomaly. Now, before this feature existed, we would turn on a feature and babysit it, right? Maybe eventually our friends in finance or our cloud engineers would tell us, like, hey, something spiked with cloud spend. But now we can actually like associate it with a cloud cost anomaly, just so, the engineer or whoever doesn't have to like dig around or hunt for things. It actually, shows up in that. And then other flags too, which is great. So you can see here, this one was recently created, but it's monitoring, right? So we have that active monitoring for those metrics, just to kind of see if that cloud spend is increasing or decreasing. Like if it decreases, most of the time that's good, I suppose, but in some cases that's bad, because then maybe something isn't working quite right. So if I go back into this flag, for example, and if I click into the perspective, I can kind of see, kind of get a feel for like where my cloud cost is changing. There's always a lot of information here, but you can kind of click into each type of workload that's deployed here to understand like the cost and the impact, and then like where your feature impacted that, which is great. So like this is a new capability that we're launching and working with customers on. So I always like to say too, as a product manager, we can turn this feature on, get feedback from you, and make enhancements quickly for that too. Another thing I just kind of wanted to share in the platform, which relates to cost, is our automated stale flag management. So here, we have our list of flags. We can identify what feature flags are stale or old. Usually what I see in the industry, again, like people look every 3 months or every 6 months for what flags they should delete. Has it been triggered? Has it been used? Has it been evaluated, or just the age? And then they go through a sprint of activity to remove that flag from their code base. But with harness feature flags, we actually identify that stale activity based on time period and evaluations, and if it's being used in the code. But then what you can actually do is just mark a flag as stale, mark ready for cleanup. And then this, once you do this will kickstart a pipeline that you can create to automatically remove that flag from your code. And what's great, if I look at like the harness code repository, which is our new source code management system, this is actually what it ends up looking like. So it submits a pull request, right, that you can actually remove the code. Here you see the red is what's removed, and the green is what it did. But now you're actually removing that feature flag from your code base safely, securely. Currently, right now, like harness won't automatically do this. Like it creates the pull requests, and you go through your own approval processes. But as we build this capability out more, we can lean into automating these things. But for now, humans are good, right? And we need developers' eyes on code just to kind of make sure things are behaving correctly and everything. One thing I was going to share quick too, before I answer questions, since I have my screen shared right now too. But if you go to the assets in the handout, We have our feature flag website, but if you hit get in touch, you can fill out a form, and myself and my coworkers will get in touch with you, or you can sign up for a feature flag account. We have a free account, free forever, where you can try out feature flags and all that kind of great stuff. And then also for cloud cost management as well, we have a savings calculator that you can fill out to kind of understand like hard dollar savings for your cloud, just so you can kind of get that perspective, and then we can kind of deep dive into that capability for you. So I'm going to stop sharing right here. Awesome. And we can start going over some questions.
Okay. Yeah, sounds good. And Matt, great presentation. First things first, you called attention to the corn on your wall, but I also noticed that posters, and so did AJ from the audience. So what is your favorite Death Cab for Cutie song?
I have too many. Like, these are this is my favorite album. I'm trying to wonder if a friend is kind of like getting over, but this whole album is my favorite, Transcendentalism. So gotta do a shout out for that. But there's always like one person that likes Death Cab for Cutie with me. So yeah. Thank you.
Well, you got two today. I'm one. I'm a big fan of the song "Crooked Teeth," and then AJ weighed in. His toss up is between "I Will Possess Your Heart," "The Sound of Settling," and "Ghosts of Beverly Drive."
Hey, that's awesome.
Next question. What mechanisms can be put in place to ensure continuous feedback and improvement in the use of feature flags for cloud cost optimization?
Yeah, the way, like today, how most folks do that is just, through manual interactions. They have forecast meetings like once a week or once a month, or they kind of wait for somebody else to like tell them about it, right? Or they're logging into a dashboard. Like how I'm trying to solve that today with Harness, right, is having integrations between those solutions, just so there's that automated and continuous feedback. Like if you don't have Harness or use it, then you're often leveraging manual processes and procedures, and meetings at the end of the day to kind of navigate those as well. So
okay,
good question.
All right, excellent.
Yeah,
excellent. Another question: how can user feedback be effectively incorporated into the decision-making process for feature deployment and rollback?
Yeah, can you repeat that question one more time? Just
yeah, sure.
So
it was how can user feedback
about that too.
Yeah, how can user feedback be effectively incorporated into the decision-making process for feature deployment and rollback?
Yeah, I think, usually there's a couple of ways to look at the user feedback. So there's like operationally, is what I just deployed as a new feature reliable, right? Is the system responding in the same way? Usually there's like a steady state of metrics for an application. So like operationally with feature flags, you can incorporate with integrations like, are my operational metrics still steady? And then there's also like the marketing aspects of things. Oftentimes people look at this with like A/B testing or experimentation. But this is where you're kind of seeing like, are people clicking the blue button more than the red button versus the purple button, or geographically, like which folks like this type of view of your website or not. In my previous days working at a retail bank, like we deployed looks and feels of our website to different areas of the country based on what they kind of shopped. So that's another way you can kind of understand, like, and get feedback from your customers in real time using feature flags by navigating through those operational metrics as well as like A/B testing requirements. So cool.
Gotcha. Okay, excellent. Got a scalability question here. Wondering, looking ahead, how should organizations plan for the scalability of feature flags in their cloud infrastructure to maintain cost efficiency as they grow?
Yeah, usually organizations, they'll be like one or two teams that maybe start using some sort of feature flag system. Maybe it's homegrown, right? Or it's kind of like built into like their database that they're using. But then as you start scaling, right, like what you're going to be looking for is like how's my business running, if you will. Like if you imagine like a power plant with all the levers switched on, off, and the valves open and close and all these different states. As you scale, like if you don't have a feature flag management system, it's hard to understand like how your business is operating, if that makes sense. Like what customers are seeing what, right? So
Yeah.
as you scale, right, like you really need that feature management system to kind of operate your business, right? So like your product teams can understand the state of what they've deployed. And then also just other, brick walls that people run into, generally speaking, around is just like the tech debt of code. Because at the end of the day, like a feature flag is a different code path that, your customers are navigating through. So if you don't have that lifecycle management built in, where it's automated, to remove those, identify and like remove those flags, then you're going to bear the burden of, every quarter you're going to have a 2-week sprint to kind of manually go and remove, that flag, that old code path for a user base. Or like in the history that I've had before too, like you'll have like an incident that occurs, and you'll find out it was from some tech debt of code, and then you kind of react to it. So like a lot of teams that are scaling out their flag systems, if they don't have a proper management solution, they run into reliability issues for that as well. So,
Excellent.
cool.
Yeah, hey, I had a question for you, which was, you showed that calculator, and I'm wondering what's sort of the range of savings that you see from customers when they start to, manage their flags or use flags and manage them.
Yeah, for that. I mean, it's interesting. Usually we see, this depends on the cloud bill of a certain group and how many teams are using it. Oftentimes,
Sure.
a lot of large enterprises don't even know what their whole cloud spend is, the way they manage it. But just in general, like our tool, like if you're using cloud cost management, it often pays for itself. So the cost of the software, but we have case studies on our website where people have saved millions of dollars, on their cloud spend across the whole organization, in just a few months, rolling up to that year. So it's interesting as you see that, like we're not talking about, nickels and dimes of cost savings. We're talking about, tens of thousands of dollars, reaching up to hundreds of thousands across a year, especially for those big, large organizations. So
that's awesome. Another question here: Can feature flags be integrated with existing cloud management tools and platforms for real-time cost monitoring and optimization?
Yeah. So today, like APIs for different applications can talk to each other. You can build APIs to do the manual reporting and whatnot. But really, like kind of what I demoed today, right, articulates like that native integration between like cloud cost tools and feature flags and continuous delivery. So really, like the platform that Harness provides, we got this feedback from our customers about how they needed, different parts of their business to talk to each other without, having to have these meetings, right? So then if you can handle the native integrations with our applications, then we're, making your business processes more efficient and, getting the feedback of like feature changes to cloud cost changes and everything. So yeah, so if you're not using our platform, you're, having meetings and, building, custom reporting, but that can be fun sometimes, but usually not.
So on a related note, are there any specific tools or services that you recommend that work exceptionally well with feature flags for cost management purposes?
Again, like with Harness, feature flags can be, used independently, right? You don't need the entire platform, and we have a robust API that can be leveraged with, any other tool that you have out there. But really where I'm seeing like the industry go, especially with our platform, is having feature flags orient itself around the whole business and life cycle of everything. So again, like with harness feature flags, we have, native integrations with chaos engineering so that you can, test the reliability and resilience of a feature before giving it to your customers. We can, natively integrate with service level objectives. So if you're a site reliability engineer, that's protecting the production environment, you can put in quality gates, reliability gates, so that the developers can't continuously like push bad defects to production, to create those incidents. But I'm just seeing, in general, the industry, like feature flags being that driver for that customer experience as well as that developer experience, just so that, developers don't have to bear the burden of incidents anymore. Or at a very minimum, the incidents they deal with are just like trivial things that they can just, manage through in a matter of minutes.
Excellent. Well, Matt, I think we've come through all the questions here. Just, you mentioned the link earlier, just sort of at the tail end of your demo there, for more information on feature flags. And I'm just wondering, is there a place that you recommend people start, with feature flags? Like, is there an easy way to, to see the power, sort of like low-hanging fruit with feature flags for people who are just getting started with it?
Yeah, like on our website, we have videos, right? We have links to case studies. We have tutorials within our docs and everything. If you create like a free forever account with harness feature flags, we have product videos in there. We have an easy onboarding guide for that. And really what I recommend, like if you're using, a homegrown solution, pair up with your coworkers, get a free account, incorporate the feature flag SDK that we have. And, we usually say like in 15 minutes, you can fire up your first feature flag, which in essence, some people call like Boolean as a service, true, false. But that's, it's a great way to experience that. Otherwise, I, as a product manager, I have, monthly webinars that I offer myself to, like prospects and customers just to give them the hands-on experience they need. And, just kind of that collaboration across the team to kind of like jump in and kind of experiment. So, yeah.
Excellent. All right. Well, Matt, thanks. This was a great presentation. Really appreciated the demo and all the insights here in the Q&A. I learned a lot. I hope everybody did. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, you're welcome. And thank you, everybody, as well. So cheers.
All right. All right. Before we wrap up, we have one more piece of business. It's the Amazon gift card prize drawing. And the winner of the $250 Amazon gift card today is Kevin Wilkie from Georgia. So congratulations to Kevin. We'll be in touch to get you your card. And with that, on behalf of the Actual Tech Media team, I want to thank Harness for making this event possible. And thanks as always for attending and for your great questions. That's going to conclude today's event. Have a fantastic rest of your day.